What's up guys, Hello's from Football Talk here, back with another edition of a divisional draft and roster review segments where I shine light on every single team in the NFL and talk about every single pick they made in the draft. As I run through those, I begin by giving a short evaluation of the player's skill sets, how those fit within the new team, what the role could look like, and then I share my thoughts on the draft as well overall, what I like, what I didn't like, movement across the board, and understanding of where to find value and or address needs with how things fell. Then to wrap up the video, I'll rank those 4 teams from a division against one another based on what I think the plan was and how well they executed it. I have in-depth scouting reports on like 140 prospects over on my page Footballtalk.com if you want to dive even deeper into these players, to go with other draft related content, but other than like 1 or 2 names per video, I did watch all of these guys that were selected and will try to deliver some notes on them to paint a picture on what to expect. Once again, you appreciate the insight, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet. YouTube can be a bit random, but if you hit that little bell, supposedly you shouldn't miss any of these in the future. Thanks again. As I mentioned earlier in the week, both the Southern divisions didn't necessarily shine on draft weekend, and I think a strong case can be made that based on the information we currently have, this collection of the Texans, Colts, Jaguars and Titans brought up the most questions at least, but there are also quite a few interesting discussion points that I want to hit on. You can find timestamps for each team down below as well, by the way. Please keep in mind that I'm recording this about 2 weeks early, in case I miss anything that happened since then here. But we'll start now with the Houston Texans, who made their trade with the Vikings to move down nearly 20 spots in exchange for a second rounder next year basically, I think a good month ahead of the draft. And at 42nd overall, they selected Kamara Lassiter, the cornerback out of Georgia. Then with the original second rounder 59th overall, they took Blake Fisher, offensive tackle Notre Dame. 3rd round 78th overall, Kalen Bullock, safety USC. 4th round 123rd overall, Kate Stover, tight end Ohio State. 2 6th rounders, 188th overall, Jamal Hill, linebacker Oregon. And 205th overall, Jawar Jordan, running back Louisville. And then 3 7th rounders, Solomon Byrd, edge USC, Marcus Harris, interior D-lineman Auburn, and Ladarius Henderson, offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Michigan. Starting with Lassiter now, before we get into the player evaluation, because I love this tape, I understand why some people may think this was a bit underwhelming, considering they moved down from the first round in that trade with the Vikings, as they got that second rounder next year back, along with a late round pick swap. That selection that they gave up, after the Vikings actually traded up again, ultimately ended up being LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr., and I didn't think the trade created surplus value, considering they could have still moved down with better ammo on day 1. Just look at the Panthers basically getting the same compensation from the Rams for a move down by 13 spots in the second round, even with that round 2 selection next year, maybe a few slots later. Don't want to let that influence my evaluation of this player, however, even if the idea behind this exercise is to not just look at players in a vacuum. For that I have extensive scouting reports on him and nearly 150 players on my site, as I already mentioned, if you're interested. But let's get to Lassiter now himself. Super physical, well-schooled pressman outside corner, whose feet and hands are so well synced, along with the route anticipation and recognition to stay connected with receivers. He's surprisingly quick to redirect and off coverage and drive forward in quarters, which is backed up by a 93rd percentile 3-count drill at the combine, and he times his jumps well when high-pointing the ball. Quickly IDs screens and tosses aside blocking receivers with sound technique as a tackler. With that lanky build, Lassiter can be vulnerable to some push-offs, going up against bigger bodied outside receivers, and lacks some recovery burst, running in the mid to high 4.5s at his pro day, depending on your source. And he hasn't picked off any passes since his freshman season. So I understand the concern with a press corner who lacks great speed and ball production, but his tape last year with the job description of not letting guys get open against him was as good as any corner in the country. It's interesting because they already have a 3rd overall pick, Derek Stingley Jr., entering year 3 after breaking out this past season, and in general D'Amico Ryans and Matt Burke want to run a lot more zone coverage, where they squeeze down the pattern. So maybe the idea here is to just have guys that condense the field with the way to bother receivers, and then to be able to actually play tight man to man on 3rd downs, not allowing the ball to get out quickly. But with the addition of Jeff Kuda, I could also see Lassiter be put in the slot, and Jimmy Ward once again playing more deep safety. Later in the second round, they selected Blake Fisher, the Notre Dame offensive tackle, with their own pick. The guy who lined up on the opposite end of 5th overall pick Joe Alt for the Notre Dame line. 6'6", 315 pounds, with a lot of force in his hands, good balance, and the dexterity to sustain blocks at more challenging angles. Offers a quick first kick and pass pro for a big right tackle to cut off the angle of edge rushers, and times up his strikes well to counter the approach of his opponents, transitions early, and is sturdy enough to take over slanting rushes and twists. And even when he's caught in suboptimal positions, his ability to re-anchor and get the job done anyway is impressive. Generally plays a little too top heavy and loads up his strike in the run game, allowing some savvy edge defenders to swipe him by or pull him off themselves. And if he presents the soft outside shoulders regularly against NFL competition, he'll be taking advantage of more regularly. So this was surprising since they obviously have Laramie Tunsil in Houston as a borderline All-Pro on the left side, and Titus Howard is under contract for 3 more seasons. So maybe they look to move either Howard or Fisher to compete for left guard with Kenyon Green, but more likely as a reaction to how often they've been hurt on the edges. And if they actually do want to move Howard eventually, there'll always be demand for tackles. I personally really liked Fisher, but more so in the 3rd round. Funnily enough, with these next 2 picks, the Texans give up pick 123 to move up 6 spots here with the Eagles, but wanted that selection back in exchange for a 5th rounder next year, so did ultimately make those 2 selections anyway. I did have Cade Stover higher straight up than Kalen Bullock, so if you want to swap those 2 in your mind, I'm perfectly fine with it. With Bullock just outside my personal top 100, but as a duo they came at appropriate value. Let's start with Bullock here, who's a fluid move on the back end with oily hips and a lot of range that he provides to play in the high post and make plays numbers to numbers if quarterback let the ball hang up in the air. He has 32.5-inch arms, flips all of vertical routes, and has the speed to hang with slot receivers playing close up or off man, and the big selling point here are the ball hawking skills, being able to attack the ball at its apex with excellent hands for a DB. Now, the run game is a real issue, where he's not always taking optimal angles and is a little hesitant to stick his face in the fan, so to speak, even if his missed tackle rate isn't terrible, but he does always allow plenty of yards for contact. And then he tends to drift too deep playing center field at times, allowing plenty of free real estate in front of him for offenses to attack. So I was personally a lot lower than consensus on Bullock throughout the process, and he did slide eventually. I would have also taken him around later, but I don't hate this, considering D'Amico and company will get this guy to buy in for his fast, physical Houston defense, and he gives them freedom to rotate into middle of the field close structures more regularly, with the 2 current starting safeties being better suited to playing split field or even as big nickels, so we could see more variety in that regard from them. While Cade Stover, the Ohio State tight end, I think should have gone around earlier, so as I already said, I'm going to flip those names in my mind. A legit wide tight end who transitioned from linebacker at Ohio State a couple of years ago, bringing the frame, hip roll, and mentality to contribute as an inline blocker. Already has shown substantial improvements at setting up his route breaks, is light enough on his feet to elude ancillary zone defenders, but can also shield the ball in the air. And he consistently attacks the ball away from his frame with good hand positioning, without becoming a load to bring down at 250 plus pounds, as he averaged nearly 7 yards after the catch last season. He doesn't offer a whole lot of juice vertically or after the catch, which was backed up by an underwhelming combine performance, and there's some stiffness in his upper body, which shows up trying to recover as a blocker or contorting his body for the ball. Nevertheless, I thought it was an excellent addition, along with bringing back veteran Dalton Schultz on a 3-year deal. I could see them use more 12 personnel early this season until Tank Dell is 100%, and eventually Stover takes over that starting gig, while Schultz is more of a big slot whose role diminishes anyway. He had some bad moments towards the end of last year, I thought. They wanted to get that short-term deal done, but maybe eventually they want to get out of it. Let's ramp it up a little bit from this point onwards, starting with Jamal Hill, the Oregon linebacker, who I didn't study as extensively as the rest of this group, and looked at more as an undrafted free agent who might stick on the roster. Moved from safety to linebacker this past season, starting half of Oregon's 14 games, 6 foot flat, 215 pounds, 4.45 speed and great length. When he's kept clean and can float to the ball, that range on the second level can be an asset, and he may see the field on defense some as a package player, patrolling the middle of the field on long downs. But really you're drafting this guy for special teams purposes. 440 such snaps over his time with the Ducks, and I'm guessing with the new kickoff rules that increased his value, even though Houston still made former picks here, so they might have been able to wait here and get him a little bit later. Next up, the Louisville running back Jawar Jordan, who I actually preferred among the Cardinal running backs, over Traxter Isaac Guerrero, who went to the 49ers in the 4th round. But while he may be bigger and faster, Jordan is simply a better runner. Patient but efficient decision maker behind the line of scrimmage, who built in his lower body to adjust on the fly, can get through tight creases, consistently is able to reduce his surface area for would-be tacklers with small movements, and is able to get by them. Plus he catches just about everything, and always seems to make the first man miss after it. Small and slow, doesn't typically play a lot in the NFL, with a guy at 190 pounds, running in the mid 4.5s, so you don't see him burn angles out to the sideline or plow through D linemen, trying to reach out for him as he shoots through gaps. But I think this can be a number 2 back in the league, and in this role is an excellent number 3 behind Joe Mixon now, and Dameon Pierce trying to turn things around in year 3, as they made a schematic switch last season with Bobby Slowick. Bringing us to the 3 7th round picks, first with Solomon Byrd, the USC edge, slippery skilled pass rusher who can deceive blockers with body language and create angles for himself, and you can use him in a variety of games up front. While in the run game, he plays with a good combination of violence and effort to chase down the ball. Plus I like his ability to drop out and track the quarterback's eyes in coverage at times. Lacks some discipline to not try to jump inside in the run game, gets caught hand-fighting too much with tackles in passing situations, and doesn't have the power to really stress guys in that capacity. And the reason he went in the 7th round is that he ran a 5 flat basically at 250 pounds at his pro day. So he's probably going to be the number 5 edge though because of the depth that they kind of lost here. Bringing us to the other D lineman that they brought in, Marcus Harris from Auburn on the interior. I like a lot better than the other Auburn D tackle that I discussed in the 7th round for the Cowboys, who his level of activity and the way he stresses the edges of blockers is far superior for Harris. Fights for his gap in the run game, playing with a low center of gravity and showing impressive lateral mobility, along with sudden hands defending zone concepts, while he has some wiggle to him as a pass rusher, along with great awareness for the weight distribution of protectors and how to take advantage of it. Too much of a peeker when asked to 2-gap in the run game, and can look surprised by how he's ridden off track by angular blocks at times, and the line that I had on him in my scouting report as a pass rusher wants to be a jiu-jitsu fighter with his hands, but ends up swatting away flies instead of connecting with the reach of blockers. Houston has added a lot of depth on the defensive interior, so it'll be a steep climb to make this roster, but I think the urgency as a player gives him a solid chance here. And then finally, Ladarius Henderson from Michigan. I thought at best was the number 4 lineman on the Wolverines front, which earned the Joe Moore Award for the top O-line in the country. 6'4", 315 pounds with 35-inch arms, started 20 games at left tackle and 19 at left guard, so a lot of experience there for a program that brings out offensive linemen every year it seems like. Solid power and generally takes good angles in the run game, has the room for error with those long limbs in the pass game, and was only penalized once over his last 20 starts, but he carries his hands fairly low and makes his chest available to rushers. His body control is inconsistent, and he struggles to sustain contact in both facets of the game. I think he's a fringe roster guy in general, who you never want to actually start in the NFL, but one of those final picks, I'm fine with it. So looking at this Texans draft as a whole, I have questions. How exactly do you believe your secondary will be constructed? Do they move Lassiter inside? I did like him a lot as a press guy, but will he be allowed to do that in Houston? And as we look back now, I don't think this is a player that he necessarily wanted to end up with as a quasi-first rounder, trading back with the Vikings, along with some additional resources. Your next 2 picks were around early for me each. What's the plan to tackle or on the back end defensively with those? How much does either one of them play in 2024? Stove I do like a lot as your tight end of the future, but you get a special teamer and a number 3 running back in the 6th round, along with 3 guys after that that'll be competing for roster spots, but have no special traits that you really want to buy into and throw those darts at late in the draft. I think it's below average what they did here, and I question how much this group impacts the team this season, when otherwise you are telling us that you are the Texas team that is actually all in, trying to win a championship whilst you have CJ Stroud on the rookie deal. It's a meh for me, even though that's not too bad in this division, as you'll see moving along here. I do think that the Indianapolis Colts did a lot better here, however. In the 1st round, 15th overall, they selected Latu, edge defender at UCLA. 2nd round, 52nd overall, Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver Texas. 3rd round, 79th overall, Matt Goncalves, offensive tackle out of Pittsburgh. 4th round, 117th overall, Tanner Bodolini, interior O-lineman, Wisconsin. 3 5th rounders, 142nd overall, Anthony Gould, wide receiver, Oregon State. 151st overall, Jalen Carleys, safety, Missouri. And 164th overall, another safety from Auburn, and Jalen Simpson. 6th round, 201st overall, Micah Abraham, cornerback Marshall. And in the 7th round, 234th overall, Jonah Laulu, interior D-lineman, Oklahoma. Kicking things off with Latu, a top-ranked edge rusher, and I think without any medical concerns, he's the best defensive player in this draft, which he ultimately ended up being drafted as after we started things out with 14 straight offensive guys. Does a great job of maximizing his length and keeping his frame clean in run defense, while being able to back the blockers or disengage in order to create negative plays at a high rate. As a pass rusher, the snap anticipation, the variety of combat moves to defeat the hands of blockers with expert timing, and the flexibility to actually tilt his body towards the target, I like a pro already. And he wins a lot in the secondary phase of the rush as well, with how quickly he reacts to what opponents are doing and gets to his counters, regularly slipping past guys and affecting the quarterback. He wasn't asked to take care of traditional run fits necessarily, having to actually stack and shed a lot, and I don't think his explosiveness or length with 32.5-inch arms are up there with some of the true sack masters we have in the NFL, but I do believe he's as pro ready as a pass rusher as we've seen enter the league since Nick Bosa probably. Of course, the history of having to medically retire due to a neck injury is scary, but if that's fully cleared, I think this could pay off massively for the Colts. They already had a pretty deep stable of guys that they can send off the edge, with Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam and Dio Odingbo as someone with inside-out flexibility. I think Lato ends up starting week 1, and he'd be my bet to lead all rookies in pressures and sacks. He's that good already, even though under defensive coordinator Gus Bradley, those guys rotate through a lot. Then Adonai Mitchell, a Texas wide receiver in the second. One of the big steals in my opinion in those first 2 rounds, where I loved seeing Colts general manager Chris Ballard going on a tangent about the character concerns by unnamed sources. To me, Mitchell is kind of a route running savant already, with the way he attacks the blind spots of defenders, alters tempo, adjusts on the fly depending on how opponents react to him, and is able to win in isolated situations. Consistently is friendly to his quarterback with the way he comes out of his breaks, especially going over the middle, where he snatches passes over his head as defenders are converging on him, but he holds on to them. And down the field, his ball tracking and the way he wins with late hands is outstanding. While I don't think he quite plays up to that 4.35 speed consistently, I think a lack of effort that he's been accused of is primarily something you see as a blocker, and he hasn't provided a whole lot after the catch, in part due to his high average depth of target, but also lack of dynamic moves to make people miss, I'd say. Still, I thought Mitchell had the potential to be a legit number 1 in the league, and in this situation, I think he's a tremendous secondary option next to Michael Pittman Jr. I outlined third-year receiver Alec Pierce as a big loser in this scenario in my big draft recap, because there's no way he's more than a vertical ball-winning roleplay, I'd think, with Mitchell now as a fixture in 2 wide receiver sets. Goncalves, the Pittsburgh offensive tackle, Indy moved up 3 spots here for in exchange for a 6th rounder, as they wanted to get involved on his extensive tackle run. Goncalves presents a well-filled out frame, with strong hands to steer defenders in the run game, and relentless leg drive until the echo of the whistle. Offers a quick first step and rarely allows edge rushers to get to his outside shoulder, to where he can turn the corner on him, will flash the hands to bait edge rushers to commit at times, and then he's able to guide them past the arc as they try to dip underneath him, which led to 0 sacks on his part over the last 2 years, with nearly 500 pass blocking snaps. Barely cracks the benchmark for tackle arm length at 33 inches, and struggles to reduce his height in order to find leverage points in the run game, while unable to open his hips and re-accelerate his feet early enough to recover as pass rushers have an angle on him, along with not getting his cleats in the ground in a firm enough fashion when he used power. I thought this was a bit of a reach for a team that didn't really need help at tackle. Braden Smith has been a mainstay on the right side for them, but Bernard Ryman took a significant step in year 2 opposite of him, and he took a developmental guy with supreme athletic tools in Blake Freeland out of BYU at the top of the 4th round last year, along with throwing another dart at a small school guy in a similar profile in Jake Witts at the end of the draft. Maybe this tells us something about their development arc so far, but otherwise I think a little bit early. Indy went back to the O-line and got themselves one of the most athletic center prospects we've seen coming out in Tanner Bololini from Wisconsin after that. He put together a historic combine performance where he ran a 4.94, put up the fastest time ever in the 3-cone drill for center, and the 3rd best shuttle time ever, along with moving extremely well during the on-field portion of the workout. You see that explosiveness out of his stance to take care of longer back blocks, being able to reach block to eyes on wide zone, or pull out to the corner at times, and he has elite lateral agility along with good bend in his knees as he mirrors interior pass rushers, not surrounding the edges of his frame, including his guys come his way on twists or blitzing from the 2nd level. He's definitely a little light in the pants, and he saw guys at the Senior Bowl take him back into the quarterback's lap during the one-on-ones, and he's more of a crafty positional blocker than someone who will uproot guys in the run game. He does have starting experience at guard with the Badgers before transitioning to the pivot this past season, so I think this is another one of those guys where Ballard and company fell in love with the athletic profile, and I think he can be a nice backup option who opens up what he do in the run game, although he'll look overwhelmed the first time DeForest Buckner puts those long arms on him in practice. They took 5 other guys on day 3, so I'll try to be a lot quicker here, starting with Anthony Gould, the Oregon State wide receiver. Small, speedy receiver who does get banged around and presents a limited catch radius with a higher drop rate than you'd like to see, since he elevates for too many passes that he doesn't have to, but really tough to get a tell on where he wants to go as a route runner, with the suddenness to elude contact at the line, and legitimately can win from the X spot, is able to bend or make sharp transitions of either foot, friendly to a quarterback with his breaks, and he's not afraid to go over the middle of the field. Plus, then he slips, bounces, and spins off way more attempted tackles than his size would indicate. 51 misses forced on 71 catches alone these last 2 years. He's a tremendous backup option for Josh Downs in the slot, and can also stretch the field as a Z at times. Jalen Collins from Missouri, a big physical safety at 6'3", 225 pounds, who can be used as a dime backer or blitz from different spots with the power to run through backs and protection, but he actually spent less than a quarter of his career snaps in the box, as you see him open and run with vertical pushes playing deep, can really challenge tight ends with those 34-inch arms and big hands, and he tracks and high punts the ball for impressive interceptions in 50-50 situations. He looks a little lost when the action is behind him, and he drops to a spot rather than showing the instincts and awareness to float underneath routes as a shallow zone defender. Too often he's over-aggressive with the way he drives on the ball or over-pursues targets, and he'll need to learn how to break down as a tackler. I think he's a package player early on, as really only one of those two outside corner spots likely is up for competition, as a look at the starting five in the secondary right now, but Collins could grow beyond that. They go with another safety next in Jalen Simpson from Auburn, who's about 40 pounds lighter as someone who transitioned from corner just a year ago, provides excellent range out to either sideline when he was asked to play single high, does a good job of mid-pointing vertical patterns, and shows natural ball hawking skills to elevate for passes, and you see the background on the outside with his efficient change of direction skills along with the length that he provides, but isn't always taking a direct path to the ball and proactively involving himself against the run, while definitely being more of an ankle biter as a tackler, tends to gain excessive depth playing deep and ends up covering grass too much, while he didn't look comfortable playing with his back to the quarterback. So I believe he is better suited to play safety as he learns the intricacies of the position, even though they look at him as a slot guy maybe at least. But just in case they did get another outside corner late in Micah Abraham from Marshall, physical, plays above his size and coverage, explosive plant and drive, playing top down on routes, shows excellent eyes and instincts for route combinations in order to position himself to make plays on the ball, tracks deep passes well and approaches them as if he were the receiver, which is how he amassed 11 picks and 50 PBUs in 3 years as a starter, and he doesn't typically surrender his contain responsibility, but definitely more of a reserved run defender who waits for the ball to come to him, and then also throws his body at guys with a massive 18% miss rate for his career, and he can be out-wrestled for positioning by bigger receivers at only 5'10", 185 pounds. So not the size profile they typically value, but has the ball production to intrigue you. And finally, Jonah Laulu, the interior D-lineman from Oklahoma. I did not get to or really was even familiar with him during the process, but 6'5", 295 pounds, tested really well, has experience in a versatile Oklahoma front under Brett Venables, so worthy of taking late fly on probably, but I can't speak very educated on him. All in all, I thought the Colts stuck to the principles of getting athletic standouts and addressing the trenches on both sides of the ball, although I loved that they took the more refined Latu at the top instead of the freaky Dallas Turner out of Alabama for example. Mitchell in the second was a flat-out steal for me, who got down-talked because he apparently was a little hangry during interviews with his blood sugar being off, as someone who deals with diabetes. Goncalves in the third was definitely early for me, but Bortolini around later I really liked the movement skills and versatility that he provides in a backup capacity, while Gould went about where he should have, but I think brings some really intriguing qualities working downfield or making stuff happen with the ball in his hands. And then they continued the tradition of just throwing darts at the secondary. I hope they don't rotate for corners like they did last season, but I think it's a viable strategy if you don't feel like you can solve that problem up high. Excellent group of players, and I generally agree with Ball's approach to the draft. I do have a lot more questions, however, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who went heavy on Tigers early on, as in the first round, 23rd overall they selected Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver LSU, second round for the 8th overall Mason Smith, interior D-lineman LSU, third round 96th overall Jaron Jones, cornerback Florida State, couple of 4th rounders, 114th overall Javon Foster, offensive tackle Missouri, and 2 picks later Jordan Jefferson, another interior D-lineman out of LSU, 2 5th rounders, 153rd overall Deontay Prince, cornerback Ole Miss, and 167th overall Keelan Robinson, running back Texas, in the 6th round 212th overall Cam Little, kicker Arkansas, and in the 7th round 236th overall Miles Cole, edge defender Texas Tech. Let's begin with the wide receiver out of LSU, Brian Thomas Jr., 6'3", 210 pounds with 4.33 speed, dusting DBs in the SEC with regularity. That's pretty rare. He's also pretty flexible at that height to contort his body for the ball, has that extra gear to run underneath deep balls, and showcases tremendous body control when the placement leads him back into contact. And he gives you more after the catch than you might expect, immediately piercing up the field, being able to drop his hips to get around defenders, and extending forward for hidden yardage. He does present that larger surface area for defenders to put hands on him, and generally he needs to learn how to utilize pacing more effectively as a route runner, where he ran almost all hitches, curls and go routes, and he needs to attack the ball at its earliest window more often, instead of letting it drop into his stomach, with nearly 10% drop rate. The size speed profile is off the charts, very much what general manager Trent Baalke covered. I think they got pretty lucky here to get him at 23, when the top 3 receivers were gone by pick 9, and we know the NFL was high on Thomas, but moving back 6 spots with the Vikings for an extra 5th rounder and a 3 plus a 4 next year, and still getting what may be the new number 1 receiver, as you have Christian Kirk as a super slot and Gabe Davis is more of a big vertical number 3. I think this was a great start to the draft. Unfortunately, things didn't continue that way, since I thought Mason Smith, the interior lineman out of LSU, went a couple of rounds earlier than he should have. I get the intrigue as a former 5-star recruit who really flashed as a true freshman in the SEC. But if we're being honest, this guy doesn't really know what he's doing out there yet, reading blocking schemes and countering them with appropriate. But if we're being honest, this guy doesn't really know what he's doing out there yet, reading blocking schemes and countering them with appropriate technique. Doesn't get off the ball with enough urgency in the pass game, while his upper and lower body seem to be rather disjointed, which makes those rush moves look fairly erratic. He does have a ton of natural strength and 35-inch arms to dominate solo blockers at times and blow up run plays. Can split double teams occasionally and just swallows up running backs with 0 missed tackles last season, and you see the force in his hands being able to replace and find spots to attack in order to get the lineman off balance and create angles for himself towards the quarterback. This is a selection that can definitely work on in the long run if Smith keeps honing in his craft and plays up to his potential eventually as a true junior, but has shown such little growth since he arrived at LSU, even with the understanding that he was coming off knee surgery this past season. No way he's starting over Roy Robertson Harris. I like Devon Hamilton, who they drafted a couple of years ago, and maybe he's the replacement there. But then they also drafted Smith's teammate a couple of rounds later, who I'll skip ahead to here for the purposes of this, in Jordan Jefferson. Another well-built tackle with a trunky little half and forceful hands, who offers a good first step slanting across gaps. Even when his hand placement is suboptimal, you rarely see Jefferson getting rid of his landmarks and down blocks, and he regularly squeezes his man into the scrum. And he brings the power in his legs to work the depth of the pocket with the bull rush, along with getting those big paws up to bat down passes if he doesn't get home. But another guy who currently gives you very little as a pass rusher, other than working his power, and offensive linemen are able to sit down eventually on it, since they understand not much else is coming, and he's more worried about owning his space than creating angles and flowing towards the ball, I thought. The dude had 7 QB pressures on just over 200 pass rush snaps last season, and when he got stonewalled on back-to-back reps during Senior Bowl practices, he tossed another man's helmet out of frustration. Not trying to demonize him here, I wish all the best to the kids, but I just don't get it. Definitely a couple of rounds early for me as well, and once again, the physical profile exceeds what the player actually is currently. So in the end, they used a mid-2nd and an early 4th rounder, and didn't even get the best tackle coming out of LSU, I thought, which was Mekhi Wingo, who went late in the 5th round, I believe, to Detroit. Moving back one selection, however, now to Jarrian Jones, the Florida State corner. I liked it a lot better as they're looking for a solution in the slots after drafting Antonio Johnson on day 3 out of Texas A&M last year, who I think is still part of this competition. But Jones is an extremely smart player who understands receiver splits, position on the field, etc., and adjusts his technique accordingly, playing a lot of sticky coverage with 4.38 speed. Expertly plays to his leverage and zone coverage and cuts off targets trying to cross-face him, with tremendous eyes to toggle between the quarterback and targets in his vicinity. Consistently plays with extension through blocks in the run game, and not afraid to fill the D-gap in condensed sets. Rounds off at the breakpoint too much and allows receivers to access the middle of the field in off coverage, while I think there's room for improvement in his conviction to ID and drive pass concepts in zone. And then he missed 18% of attempted tackles over the past 2 years combined, not hitting with his chest and driving through contact appropriately, but I think comes at solid value and gives them options that they can throw into the slots, in case they like Johnson playing better deep, since they didn't address safety otherwise at all. Then let's get to the other 4th rounder, along with Jefferson, Javon Foster, the offensive tackle out of Missouri. Once again, I liked it a lot better. well-proportioned tackle who held his ground against some of the top-tier SEC pass rushers with good patience and understanding for where his landmarks are, flashes with the outside hand occasionally to force rushers to throw their hands, and then can also stab with it into the chest that they've opened up now to take the fight to them, only allowing 1 sack and no QB hits on 450 pass blocking snaps last season. While in the run game, he chooses his angles well and carries plenty of jolt in those hands. He does rely on sort of hugging edge rushers rather than latching inside and winning with leverage as a run blocker, and he pops out of his stance early without bracing against power as proactively as you'd like to see. I thought he was primarily a fit for a zone-based rushing attack, while the Jags transitioned to more duo and angles-based stuff where they pull bodies across the formation, but I think his pass pro floor that he presents makes him a quality backup who can start when called upon. Next up, DeAndre Prince from Ole Miss in the 5th, patient corner with 4.38 speed as well, to run with guys on goes and post routes in isolated situations, plays through the hands of the intended target with good timing to dislodge the ball, can make plays outside his area as a zone defender, and lassos bigger ball carriers to the turf to good effect as a tackler. Too easily, however, is taken off balance by savvy receivers at the line, has shorter arms and relied heavily on a side saddle technique as a zone defender, because flipping hips comes with a bit of a hitch up at times, while there's also a bit of a delay redirecting forward with the T-step. He was my number 40 corner in an insanely deep class, so maybe a little bit more about the guys that were also available, but once again, speed is a trump card. I would have preferred several other options above him and viewed him as a flyer super late, as he did need to add more depth there. But then let's get to Keelan Robinson, the Texas running back. I mentioned him as a reach in a big draft recap, and feel free to question me for complaining about a 5th round running back here, but as I said in that piece, there was still plenty of talent left at that point, and forget about me because I had him even a couple of spots later than that, but this was the RB31 on consensus boards, yet he was the 15th one off the board. This is a 5'8", 185-pound running back with less than 800 rushing yards in 5 seasons between Alabama and Texas, and only once caught double-digit passes. Clearly this was a pick made with the return game in mind, where he made an impact on kickoffs this past 2 seasons, but he didn't even return punts in college. One pick before that went Purdue's Tyron Tracy Jr., who was my personal RB8 with a receiver and return background. This in comparison profiles as someone who typically goes undrafted. Jacksonville signed Devin Duvin in his offseason, who did both for the Ravens, so I'm not even sure Robinson makes that active roster unless they carry 4 backs. Then 6th round Arkansas kicker Cam Little. Once again, I don't evaluate specialists. The last of the 3 kickers that went, when we had a little bit of a run actually within 10 picks at the end of the 6th round. Funny how teams just wait until someone finally goes in for one of these guys. And like the Bears taking the only punt of the draft in the 4th round, throwing some shade at them here once again. For Little, very consistent throughout his career at Arkansas, 83% field goal rate, never missed an extra point. For a team that's kind of struggled to find a solution, bringing back Riley Patterson early this offseason after letting him go prior to 2023, at this point, sure. And finally, Miles Cole, edge out of Texas Tech. If you had told me the Jags were going to pick in the 7th round with Cole available, that would have been such an easy match to figure out. 6'6", 270 plus pounds, and actually play a little heavier with an insane wingspan, nearly 37-inch arms. Ran sub 4'7" as that jumbo-sized the end, who can lock out in the run game with those long arms and work off blocks, while he has extended room for error with those hand swipes, good power, and impressive ability at that height to get his hips flipped towards the quarterback. Once again, I'm just not really sure if he knows what he's doing out there, or if he'll ever figure it out, considering he's a 6th-year senior who played quite a bit. Doesn't show great awareness for blocking schemes and how to work against points of pressure in the run game, and his arms and legs aren't synced at this point, too often moving laterally in front of pass protectors. So he could maybe spend a year in the practice squad as they try to get the light bulb to come on. But I really wasn't a big fan of what Jacksonville did here, way too much banking on physical upside. I think other than the 3rd and one of the 4th rounders, they didn't get anybody who can contribute early on, even if it's not in a starting capacity, from day 2 onwards. Didn't love the shots they took on day 3 either, probably watched way too much LSU tape and generally relying on big programs over guys that may be better players. Trading back in the 1st round for extra resources and still getting Brian Thomas does soften the blow a little bit for me, and it's not like addressing the O-line came at great value with how heavily the NFL targeted them across the first 2 days, but I definitely believe they could have improved the team more in the short term, as they still have Terrell Lawrence on a rookie deal, and I'm not sure if some of these high upside guys they got will actually hit big here. I talked about Atlanta earlier this week, who brought in a slew of other problems with the selection of quarterback Michael Penix Jr. in the top 10, but if we're just looking at pure value and quality of players selected compared to what they invested in them, this might be my least favorite draft class across the league, and I'll let GM Trent Baalke kinda tell you what I thought about what they did past the first round with what he had for the crowd at his press conference. Sorry Jags fans and reporters. Let's close things out now, however, with the Tennessee Titans, the smallest draft class among these 4 teams with 7 selections total. First round 7th overall, J.C. Latham, offensive tackle Alabama. Second round 38th overall, T'Vondre Sweat, interior D lineman Texas. 4th round 106th overall, Cedric Gray, linebacker North Carolina. 5th round 146th overall, Jarvis Brownlee Jr., cornerback Louisville. 6th round 182nd overall, Jaquan Jackson, wide receiver Tulane. And then 2 7th rounders, 242nd overall, James Williams, safety / linebacker Miami. And 10 picks later, Jalen Harrell, edge defender Michigan. As for Latham from Alabama, built like an NFL guard at 6'6", 340 pounds, but his 35-inch arms with the movement skills of a tackle, packs insane vigor in those 11-inch hands, and the ability to unlock that lower half to create displacement vertically or horizontally in significant fashion in the run game. Urgent into his pass sets to frame rushers, gets into that wide base to swallow bull rush attempt, and when he gets those hands inside the chest of guys, he puts them in a cage. Because he could rely so much on his natural strength, Latham didn't always perfectly center his blocks or get his feet aligned perfectly as a run blocker, and too often you saw him open the hips versus speed off the edge, making himself vulnerable to crossface moves and drawing flags for holding. Latham was right up there for me as one of the premier tackles, behind only Joe Alt, who went 5th overall, and Olu Fashanu at pick 11. His potential is higher than both of those guys, I'd argue, however, and I think handing that kind of guy to Bill Callahan as their O-line coach, as his son Brian trusts him to turn that O-line around, this will be a cornerstone piece for that unit, since they already built out that receiving corps. The plan seems to be having him switch sides to play left tackle, which I wouldn't have preferred personally, but if he can handle that move, he could stick there for the next decade and give that unit some attitude. Speaking of larger men who make their presence felt, pretty surprisingly, early in the 2nd round they selected T'Vondre Sweat, the Texas D tackle, 6'4", 340 pounds at the combine, and I think he played like 20 pounds heavier at Texas as a unit up front for them. You're not going to get this guy off his spot in simple down blocks, or even double teams mostly, and when he sees an opportunity to backdoor a center on zone runs, he'll create negative plays. In the pass game, Sweat can obviously work the depth of the pocket with the raw force that he has, but I appreciate the level of activity in his hands and how he creates angles towards the quarterback for himself. Due to his height and the connected center of gravity, Sweat quickly pops out of his stance, and if asked to play extensive snaps, that only gets worse. And right now, he doesn't utilize his length and power optimally to truly overwhelm solo blockers with the bull rush. I was kinda shocked to see the guy go as early as he did. I would have taken him about a round later, even if he had a clean slate, but to get charged with a DWI a couple of weeks before the biggest moment of your athletic career, combined with some of the weight control questions that come up, it's wild to see him go this early, and I wonder how much longer he would have lasted if the Titans didn't take him there. Him next to Jeffrey Simmons as a more defined free technique could be nasty, but this pick will kind of define Tennessee's class as a whole, and I personally wouldn't have been comfortable banking on what might also be just a 2-down player for you at the next level. After skipping the 3rd round, Tennessee early on the 3 selected Cedric Gray, the North Carolina linebacker, aggressive gap shooting run defender who trusts what his eyes tell him, has light feet to float around as a zone defender, combined with the ability to circle around blockers and speed to hawk down ball carriers sideline to sideline, understands very well how to rush from different spots, win with quickness or power, bounce off bodies, and ultimately get home. His ability to deconstruct blocks from offensive linemen and actually stuff ball carriers in the hole is still a bit of a work in progress, and he missed at least 17 tackles in all 3 seasons as a starter at UNC, so he's not perfect by any means, but I like the aggressive style of play, and he's not gambling but mostly taking educated risks, I'd say. I love the versatility in passing downs to carry guys down the seams, match running backs coming into the pattern, or be a pressure player from different alignments. I'm not sure I love the fit next to Kenneth Murray, who is still a fairly young player himself, at least in terms of not really growing in the way he reads the game yet, but Gray probably starts week 1, potentially even over Murray, who they paid on a prove-it deal in free agency. Then Jarvis Brownlee Jr., the Louisville cornerback, primarily lined up as a boundary corner, despite being only 5'10", 190 pounds, but consistently played above his weight class and denied free releases. Springy in the way he can flip and run with guys on fade routes without any delay, or drive forward with well-taught eyes to attack route patterns in zone coverage. Not only plays the game with an attitude and coverage, but also defending the run, where he brings a violent punch, can rip underneath blockers, and missed only about 10% of his tackles at Louisville. He does get pretty grabby at the break points if receivers get him leaning the wrong way early, which will get flagged more regularly at the next level, and his height becomes a challenge in the red zone, while I don't think he has top end long speed necessarily. But really like this player as an aggressive cover man, who I think can fit a variety of schemes, and we'll see how he acclimates himself under Denard Wilson in his first season as defensive coordinator there, depending on if Caleb Farley can finally stay healthy and turn his career around as a former first rounder. I could see this guy be the primary backup at outside corner and nickel. And then I'll try to be quick on the final three names here once again. First with Jaquan Jackson from Tulane, really fun slot receiver who is actually one of two nephews in this draft of legendary Ravens safety Ed Reed. Quick as a hiccup, with suddenness in and out of his breaks, making him a really tough cover with those two-way goes, but then he also has low 4.4 speed to run by guys occasionally, shows no fear to elevate for passes over the middle, where he bailed out his quarterback on a few occasions, protecting the ball in traffic, and then he basically forced a missed tackle on every fourth catch during his career, without a single fumble across 105 touches. Great start-stop quickness that you constantly see from him. Totally unproven playing on the ball or having to release from press coverage, where his lack of power will come into play. 8-on-3 access stuff and didn't show the best pacing all the time, leading to underwhelming production. Has a few weird focus drops and isn't going to give you a whole lot in contested catch situations. I think he adds some much needed juice to the receiver room with a bunch of bigger bodies, as well as the return game. And then the two 7th rounders, first of James Williams from Miami. I'm not sure if he'll be a safety or linebacker. You love the urgency and physicality as a run defender, where slot receivers simply have no chance against him, and he can legitimately be a full-time contributor in the box. Trusts his eyes and is aggressive in matching routes, with great closing burst, and then can separate targets from the ball as he lowers the boom on them, and you like the profile as a matchup play against tight ends. But he actually struggled in that capacity during Senior Bowl week. The play anticipation, finding the right approach, if the picture isn't clear, is somewhat lacking at this point. Too often tries to sling guys to the turf without actually using his lower body, leading to a career miss rate of over 17%, and he tested more like a linebacker anyway, so the fact he fell this far tells me the league looks at him as a dime backer and package player, where in theory there's a role for him in Tennessee. Lastly, Jalen Harrell, the Michigan edge, brings heavy hands at the point of attack in the run game, with adequate length that he maximizes in order to keep offensive linemen at bay, active to work off blocks and find his way to the ball. His snap anticipation regularly gained him an advantage off the ball in Michigan, while he angles his rushes and converts speed to power effectively, while actually bringing quarterbacks to the ground at a high rate when he gets through. His frame looks pretty filled out already. Too often I saw him be oblivious to getting pinned inside when the offense wanted to get out to the perimeter. Lacks the explosiveness of the ball and high end bend to really stress the outside shoulder of tackles, without the quicks to win inside either. But with one of the final picks of the draft as someone who has a chance to become the 4th edge, I think he can do a lot worse. So as I look at this class as a whole, I don't want to make any definitive statements quite yet here, because of the looming questions around TaWandre Sweat early in the 2nd round. If he can turn himself into a pro on and off the field, live up to his dominant size, and contribute some on passing downs at least, will be a determining factor here. I thought Latham at 7 was perfectly fine. Cedric Gray at the top of day 3 can be a starting linebacker for them. Like Brownlee Jr. as a potential future starter, or at least quality rotational piece with alignment versatility in the secondary. Jackson's a jitterbug with the ball in his hands that they don't really have a lot of. A couple of defensive pieces late who can potentially fill a role. If they just had a 3rd round pick and none in the 2nd and took Sweat there, I'd say this was a solid job. This way, with the premium pick, I do have questions if that was the right move, and I have to downgrade them a little bit here as we transition to my divisional draft rankings. Colts pretty clearly earned the top spot. As I already mentioned, I generally like how GM Chris Ballard approaches the draft and the players he brings in. Well, it's a lot of guys with intriguing athletic profiles, but most of them can actually play, rather than what we'll get to Jacksonville here in a bit. They get my top-ranked defender in Latsu to really boost the pass rush, as they anticipate to play with the lead more often, with a healthy Anthony Richardson, the pieces they've now put around him, and Shane Steichen calling the shots. Adonai Mitchell is one of those, a supercharged number 2 who can legitimately win one-on-ones as a rookie due to his route running acumen. Love that. Adding depth to the O-line, taking more shots at the secondary, I think they did a really good job. Texans are 2nd, but there is a substantial drop-off. They took a couple of guys in the 2nd round who I personally like, but it might have been even early for me. USC safety Kellen Bullock is a player I was lower on, and I question how it fits within the defensive structure, or how they're thinking about transforming it. I do really like Kate Stover as a tight end of the future in the 4th round, however, and then I'd set the over-under for the 5 guys they otherwise selected to actually be on the active roster week 1 at 2.5. So just not sure how many snaps to get out of this group, whilst they've quickly turned themselves from a team that picked 2nd overall a year ago into a dark horse Super Bowl pick this season already for many people probably. Titans come in 3rd. If you take out the sweat pick at the top of day 2, as I just discussed, they'd move up 1 spot, but I was just shocked to see him go this early with the questions around him. And even without those, that was about a round early for me, because I do think Latham up high could pay off massively if he takes that switch left tackle well, and I think they did well on day 3. It's just that looming question taking a player this early when he gets himself in trouble just a couple of weeks before this big day, and if he can be mature enough to be a pro. And at the bottom, pretty much across the entire NFL landscape are the Jags for me. I actually had them appearing 3 times across the 12 reaches that I pointed out in the big draft recap, with the 2 LSUD tackles each going a couple of rounds earlier than where I would have valued them, taking an undersized running back who didn't even return punts in his little receiving production in the 5th round. Brian Thomas in the 1st plus extra picks is what may bail them out here, and I thought they did okay with pairing all the high ceiling athletic guys with a couple of solid contributors in the middle rounds. But Thomas may be your only starter as a rookie, and you're taking some big swings here when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal and question marks across the lineup. I feel a lot worse about them this year than when he started last season off 8-3 before falling off dramatically. But that now brings us to the end of this video, as we've now wrapped up the North, East and South for both conferences. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the insight, and I'm sorry if I wasn't the nicest to your team today, but I have to keep it real here, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet and want to learn more about the rest of the NFL. You can listen to the rest of the series and or check out my written content at hello'swithfootballtalk.com. Plus, why don't you follow me on social media to interact, stay up to date with my work, and check out all the random thoughts I throw out there. Looking forward to hearing from you guys, and as always, the comment section is open for healthy debate. Of course, I'll be back next week, finishing up with the NFC and AFC West respectively, which include the 2 teams that just faced each other in the Super Bowl, and several other interesting franchises who are at different points right now. So, until then, see you later. Peace!